sweet ballerina painting today. We are so excited to see all of your beautiful paintings, so be sure to tag us with the hashtag #SeaBrookePaint. We would love to see your whole process along the way, and maybe we'll even get the chance to share some of them. We have a lot of ground to cover today, so we're just going to go ahead and dive right in and get started. So today I'm using acrylic paints. I'll be using my favorite brand, which is Golden. And I'm going to use 6 colors. So this is titanium white, Mars black, green light, ultramarine blue, red light, and a yellow medium. I will be working with 4 brushes. So I have a flat number 10, 2 rounds, a number 6 and a number 8, and then a number 1 for my detail work. We'll be using water as our medium. That's the great thing about acrylic paint is you can just water it down with water and change the consistency of it. So that will be our medium of choice today. And I just have a palette paper for my palette today. So today I'm working on a 12 by 12 canvas. This is a square canvas. While you're working on this at home, you can work on any size canvas. I'll give you different proportions so that you can measure and make adjustments for whatever size you're working on. So you'll be able to scale it up or scale it down. I'm gonna start with a sketch of our ballerina figure. And for this, I'm just gonna use the red light. Golden paint is highly pigmented paint, so you only need to squeeze out a tiny little bit. I'm also going to be using titanium white. So I'm going to start with a round brush. This is my number 6. And I like to have a little bit of water on it so that it helps the paint just to be very fluid. So I have a little bit of red with water, and then I'm gonna pick up a little bit of the titanium white, and I'm just gonna make it a little bit lighter. And add a little bit more water into it. We want this to be very fluid for the underpainting or the sketch of our painting. So whenever I am painting figures, I like to think of broad shapes and then go in and refine them. So we're just gonna start with, this is a seated ballerina. So I'm gonna start with a circle at the top where the head is gonna be. So I'm a little bit left of center. And like I said, we'll refine this shape. And then from there, I'm just gonna start with a diagonal line that's gonna work its way towards the bottom left corner. And I can already tell that my head is way too small. So I know that that is going to be adjusted. But like I said, when you're painting figures, I think it's best to start with broad shapes and then refine them as you go. You can see I'm dipping my paintbrush in water continually just to help this be really fluid. All right, so I have a diagonal line that works its way towards this bottom left corner. From there, it's gonna swing up where her knee is going to be. So I'm just drawing a giant U shape. So it's almost like a hook or something that we've drawn. From there, I'm gonna come down towards the bottom right angle. So you can see this is a very broad shape, and then we're gonna go in and refine it. I'm gonna mix up a little bit more of my red and white. Add some water. Okay, so I have my basic shape drawn. Now we're gonna start making changes so that the anatomy makes sense. So the head needs to be a little bit bigger. And I want her chin to hang down a little bit. So I'm gonna angle that on the bottom right of the circle. Okay, so we're gonna come out of the bottom left of this circle and draw just a small line for where her neck is going to be. And then I'm gonna swing to the right and draw a diagonal line for her arm. So right now we're just drawing a seated stick figure, and then we'll go in and refine all of these shapes. So I have my diagonal line, and then I want to have it go straight to the knee, where she's going to be holding her knee with her hand. Okay, so I'm just adding a little bit more water to my paint, so I'm keeping it really nice and fluid. Once we've done that, I want to go ahead and start refining this a little bit. So I'm gonna come off the left side of the diagonal line that we just drew and thicken that for her shoulder. Okay, so I've rounded out the shoulder on this line, diagonal line for her arm. And then I'm just gonna do the same thing, kind of drawing in her elbow so that it starts to read more like an arm. Then I'm gonna come off of her neck here, and I want to connect the neck to the arm. Okay, so then I'm gonna draw a straight line down. So I'm gonna draw a straight line down and then basically just connect it with the square. So basically we've just created a square shape for her bodice. All right, so then from there, I'm just gonna draw 2 diagonal lines for her tutu, so we know where that is going to be. This is going to be covering up this portion of her leg, but I like to have that drawn underneath so that I know my anatomy makes sense. And then I'm just going to draw kind of a curved line to represent where her tutu is going to fall. Okay, so I'm mixing up a little bit more of this color, not much, because we're almost done with our underpainting. I'm gonna come on the bottom of this diagonal line, and I'm just gonna draw a flat line to represent her foot. And this is gonna stop short of the edge of my canvas. And then I want to come right underneath her hand and draw a slightly curved line to round out her calf. So I'm only doing this on one side of that diagonal line. And then I want to just thicken the thigh area. And have her knee come a little bit above her hand there. And we can make adjustments as we go, but this at least gives us a starting point. And then I'm gonna go ahead and fill in her back area here. gonna go ahead and fill in her face. And then I wanna add just a small circle off the top left of her head for the hair. Once you've done that, you can go ahead and clean your brush off, and we are going to start working on our background color a little bit. So I'm gonna squeeze out some ultramarine blue. We'll also need yellow. I'm using a yellow medium. You can see I'm squeezing out just a tiny bit of these colors. With golden paint or with any professional paint, you really only need a small amount to cover a lot of ground. So while these are much more expensive, they do last a really long time. So I'm also gonna squeeze out some Mars Black, and then I'll need more titanium white as well. This got a little bit tainted with red, so I'm gonna start another section of titanium white. Okay, so I'm gonna switch my paintbrush right now, and I'm gonna switch to my number 10. So this is my largest paintbrush that I have. And this is a flat brush, so you can tell that by looking at the bristles on the top. And I just wanna kind of wet my palette in the center. Okay, so I wanna mix a kind of light navy color for the bottom of my painting. So I'm picking up some ultramarine blue, and then I'm gonna add just a small touch of black to it to kind of deepen the tone. And then just a tiny bit of titanium white. Once you have a color that you are happy with, you're going to come just right above the foot, and I'm just gonna draw a horizontal line. And for this, I'm actually just gonna take it all underneath the tutu as well, because I want this backing to be behind, even though it's going to be white. Once you have that line drawn, you can go ahead and just fill in this bottom section of your painting. I would add a little bit of water to your paint to keep it fluid. You don't want to add too much. At this point, we are trying to cover, so you want to make sure you have a good amount of paint on your paintbrush. The key with acrylic paint is to work pretty quickly because they dry really fast. If you don't have a slow drying extender as a medium to mix in, you just have to work pretty quickly so that you can blend while it is on your canvas. So I don't want to cover up this red line completely because I want to know where my tutu is going to fall. I'm going to go ahead and fill in underneath this as well. And you can actually go right over this whole section. I like to have a darker color underneath white on my canvases because that will give so much more depth to the light colors. So even though her tutu will be white later on in the painting, I want to have this base color. So we're just gonna fill all of this in. As I'm painting, if your canvas has edges on it, I like to go ahead and paint the sides of my canvas too. It's easier if you do this as you go, if you want that gallery wrap look where it wraps over the edge of your canvas. It's easier to do it as you go rather than going back at the end. So once I've filled all of this in, I'm gonna let that dry and then I'm gonna move into the background of my painting. For my background, I wanna mix a pink color. So I'm gonna use white and a little bit of red. So this is gonna be mostly white. So I'm making just a light pink color, and then I'm gonna fill in all around my figure. So you can make adjustments however you would like to on this painting. If you would rather do a light blue background, feel free to make those changes. So I'm just mixing up a little bit more of my background color because I ran out. I think it's okay if it's not exactly the same. I like to have some variety in the light pink so that there's a textural element to the background. So I'm fine with it if it doesn't match exactly. So whenever I'm working on the background, I like to dip back and forth between my paint and water just to get nice blending on the background. You can see white is definitely the color that we use the most of. For this, I'm just doing brush strokes, kind of mostly vertical, but then I'm almost doing an X pattern with my brush strokes. This is so that I'm blending it in every direction. And I want to see some of those strokes so it's not just one flat color. I definitely want my background color to be different than the outline that we started with because I don't want to lose it. So make sure that it is lighter than the figure that you have outlined right now. And I'm going right up next to it. I don't want to leave any white showing, so bring the background right up close to the figure. Then I'll kind of dip into my water just to really blend it out. So if you have any areas of your figure that you are needing to correct whenever I'm painting my background color, I think this is a good time to kind of erase and make adjustments. So because acrylic paint dries really quickly, I'm trying to do this background really fast so that it is blending together. And once I have coverage on it, I want to go back and I'm going to kind of make areas a little bit darker and a little bit lighter, and I'll show you how I'll do that. But right now I'm just getting my base color that's pretty much all the same. Let's be lighter than that. Okay, so for this background, I want my light source to be coming from the front. So one thing to keep in mind as you're painting it, I'm gonna have to squirt out more white paint, is I want it to move from light to dark. So I'm gonna do it really gradually, not anything too dramatic on this piece. You could definitely make it really dramatic if you want to. I would love to see variations of the background. So I'm squirting out a little bit more white paint here. You can see as I'm mixing, I kind of move around the palette. So mixing from the edge of these colors so that I'm not having to change that entire color of light pink. I'm kind of losing my leg down here. It's a little bit too close. As you're working on your background, make sure that your light pink is a little bit lighter than the figure that we drew, so that you can still see your sketch. Okay, so now I have full coverage. So what I'm gonna do, I haven't washed my brush, I'm just dipping it in some water, and I'm gonna pick up white paint now, and I just wanna add white paint directly on top of this. And I'm just gonna kind of blend it out, but I want to make this area lighter. another thing I'm gonna do is pick up a tiny touch of blue, very, very small. And I'm gonna come on the left side and add a little bit of blue for the shadow. So I'm just gonna kind of alter this pink color. And it's important to do this while it's still wet so that it blends in. And I'm just, like I said, creating texture. See, that was way too much and I'm barely picking up any of the pigment. So you wanna just make sure you're doing it very, very delicately. So now with it being very wet still, you can blend it in to the pink color that you have in your background. And this is just creating a nice texture, variation of light. It'll just play up the light source and show that it's coming from this side. I'm gonna add a little bit underneath her leg down here as well. Underneath her arm. Underneath her chin. So I'm just kind of adding a little bit of shadows to add depth. And then if you are having issues where it's not blending, I'm gonna demo. So like you have like blue against pink and you're not wanting it to be that severe, just pick up a little bit more water and a little bit of the pink paint and go on top of it and you can blend it out. It's important to, like I said, do this while your background is still semi-wet so that you can blend. Acrylic paint dries so quickly, especially if you're used to working in other mediums like oil paint. You just don't have as much time with it on the canvas. But there are positives to that as well. And once you have worked with acrylics, you'll figure out the pace that you need to paint at. So it's pretty quick. But you can make really intuitive marks and you can cover up mistakes really easily, like change your mind a lot faster than with oils. I think you have to be so intentional with oil painting because it takes so long for them to dry. So acrylics are a great place to start painting. So you can see how I kind of have created a light source. I can make it even more dramatic by adding white paint. So you can see I'm just blowing through the white paint, but this little tube will last for many paintings. It's very small, like this is 3/4 of an ounce, and it'll just last for many canvases. So you really only need a small amount of these to make a big impact. So I'm just mixing white on top of it. And like I said, I want my light source to be moving from the right side of the canvas. And then we'll also do that with the shadows on her skin, on the legs, to just further play up that light source coming from the right side. Right, so once you are at a place where you are happy with your background, you can go ahead and rinse your brush off. And you can always make adjustments to this at the end, but I do think for making your vignette, of the light moving that direction, I recommend doing it while it is still wet so that it's easier to work with. Sometimes I'll go in with just really chunky white paint afterwards or as the background is drying a little bit, and make some more intentional brush strokes so that you can have just some visual interest. Okay, so now I'm gonna go ahead and wash my brush off. then I'm actually gonna pick up that same blue. I need to mix a little bit more blue with some of the red, a little bit of white. And I just want a nice color for a shadow right now. So this is a blue violet. And I'm gonna just fill in underneath this bodice. And this will just be a good base color for behind the white paint that is gonna go on top of that. Bring a little bit of this into my tutu as well for another variation of color. Don't be afraid to start kind of covering up a little bit of that red. We're gonna layer up to white on this, so I'm just adding in another layer of color. It's a little bit lighter than the blue that I had underneath it. We're gonna go ahead and wash our brush off. Okay, so now that we've finished our background, I'm gonna switch over to my round number 8 paintbrush. So I'm gonna mix a variety of skin tones. And I think the most important thing to do is whatever you're painting, you wanna mix a mid-range, a light, and a darker. So I'm gonna use all of the colors for this. So you're gonna have white, yellow, red, and blue. And whenever you're mixing colors, I think it's really important just to use a tiny bit of each of them. You can always add more to it, but it's really hard to take away. And there's so many subtle nuances in different shades of skin tone, so you want to be sure just to be really mindful of that and mix just the tiniest bit. Okay, so I'm going to start with a really light skin tone. So I'm going to start with white. And then we're gonna add just a tiny touch of yellow, a tiny touch of red, just a little bit more yellow so it's not quite so pink. And then a tiny, tiny dab of blue. So I'm literally getting the smallest amount of blue on my paintbrush. That might have been even too much. That was pretty good actually. So this is gonna be our really light skin tone. So with this shade, now what we wanna do is make a darker version and a light. So this is kind of my mid-range. And then I'm just gonna add a little bit more of every color to it to create a darker version of it. So a little bit more yellow, a little bit more red. And when you're picking this up, I'm just doing a very, very small amount. Like that was way too much red. You can see how quickly you can go too far in the wrong direction. So now I'm slowly working just a tiny, tiny bit of yellow back into this color. And I'm kind of using this first color that I mixed as my guide. So now I'm trying to mix a darker version of it, and then I'll add more white to it and mix a lighter version. So you are kind of creating just a family of colors so that you have a lighter version where the light is reflecting on the skin, a darker version where the shadows are, and then a mid-range. So that's actually a pretty good dark to the light complement. From here, I'm just gonna add more white and have a really light version of this. As you can see, we have the light, the mid, and then the darker for the shadows. So we're gonna do the same thing with just more of a medium skin tone now. So I'm gonna wash my brush off. And pretty much I'm gonna be using this color for my mid-range and then go darker from that. So I have a little bit of water on my brush. Start with a little bit of white, yellow, a tiny touch of red, that was way too much yellow. It can go the wrong direction so quickly. Add a little bit of blue. So you can see on my brush, I'm using just like the smallest amount of blue. Okay, so now I want to create a darker version of this. So I'm just going to add a little bit more red. I think when you're mixing skin tones, it's important to recognize there are so many different colors in whatever skin tone you're painting. So you can have kind of like the more blues and violets for shadows. Like this would be a really pretty color to use in any palette. So as you're mixing at home, what I want you to focus on is creating your mid-range, your light, and your dark. So you can see I have my mid-range, a darker, and a light. Oops, I'm just gonna wash my brush off. All right, so I'm gonna do the same thing again, starting with that one in the center. So we use yellow, just a tiny touch of red. Tiny bit of blue.
I feel like blue is the color you want to really use sparingly, so it makes a really big difference to tone the red and the yellow down, but you can really alter the color dramatically really quickly. So just dip just like the very tip of your brush into the blue, and then you can always just keep adding more into it. Oh, that got really red really fast. You can see I've been mixing colors for a long time and I still can make mistakes really quickly. So you can change the colors really dramatically. So just when you're mixing, just use a tiny amount. Like I just added way too much red to that. I think less is more. And if you're using a small canvas at home, you really do not need a lot of paint to cover a lot of ground. So I kind of have a darker color and I'm going to tone it down with the blue. So whatever color you're trying to achieve, you can use the primary colors to get there. And like I said before, just focus on creating your mid-range, a darker and a lighter version of the same color, because we'll need all three of them. Adding a little bit more blue and just doing this very sparingly. All right, so now I'm really happy with that color, so I'm gonna just dab off my brush over here and then add more white to it for a lighter version. For where our highlights will be, and then I want to take some from the center and add more of each of the primaries to it. So blue, red, some of the yellow for a darker version. I think that color will work really well for shadows. So hopefully this helps while you are learning to paint figures at home and mixing skin tones. Hopefully this little lesson will help you in your painting practice and get you to what you want to achieve. So just be sure for this tutorial of the ballerina that you mix 3 colors. We need a mid-range, a lighter, and a dark. So the light you'll use for where the light is, the darker you'll use for shadows, and the mid-range will cover the majority of your figure. Once you have that, go ahead and rinse your brush off, and I'm gonna switch back to the tutorial. So I'm starting with this medium tone, and I'm gonna go in and paint on top of my figure with the medium skin tone. So whatever range you're working in, you're gonna start with your mid color. And I'm just gonna paint on top of the outline that I have drawn right now. I might need to add a little bit of water to it to get it moving. When you're mixing skin color, just make sure as you're doing it, you just add a little tiny touch. It's really easy for, like there's 1 million ranges of different flesh tints within mixing the primary colors, but if you add too much yellow, it can go very yellow. It can obviously turn very orange very quickly. So depending on whatever you're painting, I would just say whatever color skin color you're painting,
make sure that you just add a little bit at a time and then you just alter from there. So we're aiming to create the mid-range right now that I'm just going right on top of my ballerina of the outline that we drew. And then what we'll do is go in and add a darker version of this same color and a lighter. For her hair right now, I'm just gonna color the whole head in, and then I'll go in and add the bun afterwards and the hair color. But right now I just wanna get the base on there, so I'm just working on this entire coverage. Okay, so we have our medium tint across the entire figure. Now what I'm gonna do is move over to my darker color. You might have to add in a little bit of water at this point, depending on how much you mixed and how quickly you're working. You may have to mix a little bit more, but you should have your guide underneath so you can color match. And I would say if you're getting frustrated at home, just know this is a very advanced painting. So at this point, just stick with it. Mixing colors is challenging, even for me. I've been doing this a long time and I've painted a lot and I still find it tricky. All right, so I have my darker skin color now. And I wanna go in on the left side of basically all of my limbs, and I'm just gonna add a darker side to all of them, so wherever the shadow would hit. So I think the light source is coming from the right. So on the left side of your figure here, you're gonna have the darker shadow. I'm gonna accentuate it a little bit, so I'll exaggerate so that you can really see what I'm doing. It's a beautiful shade, I love that. Adding a tiny bit more yellow. So you see, as you're mixing, you just use your guide on your palette. You keep making little adjustments. All right, so now I have a really nice dark color. So I'm gonna go in and add the shadow on the left side of the figure, underneath the heel here. Really, I want this whole thigh area. I'm kind of picking up some of that mid-range color. I'm gonna mix in, because her arm is casting a shadow there. So you can see as you're painting, you're just gonna keep making adjustments for whatever skin color you're trying to paint. This one's gonna be you can add a little bit more white into it. And you just make little adjustments. And I think within whatever skin tone you're working on, there's just 1,000,000 different shades, so you can have variation. So I'm gonna add in, and I like to kind of blend it out. So, sometimes I'll have harsher lines, but for this one, we want it to be a little bit softer. You can see how I work back. And see, I barely picked up red paint on that and it just changed so much. So that's why you wanna always work on the edge of your palette as you're mixing, because it can alter everything so dramatically. This is where the blue comes in. That's gonna help tone it down. A lot of this is just about training your eye to see these colors, adding a little bit more yellow into it. Okay, so this is darker. Now, if you want to go ahead and make it lighter, you're just going to do the same thing, but start with a lighter base color. So now I'm gonna alter it a little bit just to show another example. So as you're working on this at home, just don't get frustrated, don't give up. I will change colors, especially when I'm mixing, just 1,000,000 times, so you know it's just a back and forth. Like as you're mixing colors, like it's all a give and take until you get the right tone. White. Ah, that red. So dramatic. Tiny, tiny touch of blue. Less is more, y'all, when you're mixing these, just a tiny bit. So once you get your mid-range, remember you're going lighter on the right side and darker on the left where the shadow is. So you just keep working back and forth between those three colors. The mid-range, the lighter, and the darker. You can really exaggerate it too and do really bright on that right side. It'll really drive the point home of your light source coming from the right there. I think people and figures are some of the most challenging subjects to paint. So if you're just starting out, just know the more you paint, the more you mix, the more confident you'll be. So you can see how we're creating that gradient of light to dark. Gonna be way too much red. Sometimes if you're mixing, if your color is just getting really crazy, you just need to wash your brush off and start again.
I'm using just a really tiny amounts of blue right now to just alter this. So it's just working back and forth between your primary colors. As long as your figure is still a little bit wet, you can go in with a more dramatic red to alter your skin color while it's on the canvas. It's kind of like what we talked about with the background color. If it's still a little bit wet, you can mix while it's on the canvas and make little adjustments. I want my face to be a little bit more pinky, so I'm just adding some white and red to the face. I'm sorry, not white and red, but white. I'm mixing this more red flesh tone that I have, adding more white to it, and I'm just gonna add a little bit of pinkier tones to my face. And I want my face to be just a little bit lighter than the rest of the body. So you want that highlight everywhere. A highlight on the front of the face, a highlight on the neck, highlight on the round of the shoulder. Once you're done getting that gradient of light to dark, go ahead and wash your brush off. Make sure it's nice and clean. Okay, so next up we're gonna talk about mixing hair colors. There's obviously a million different hair colors, but I'm just gonna show you 3 basic ones, and you can make adjustments for whatever you're painting at home. So we're gonna need the primary colors, yellow, red, blue, and titanium white, and you just need a tiny dab of each of these. So just squeeze out a tiny bit. Oh, and white. You also could use just a small amount of Mars Black. So I'm just gonna have a little bit of that on hand as well. Okay, so we're gonna start with a blonde. So blonde hair is actually a version of skin tone. A lot of people think it's straight yellow. It's not. I sometimes will use yellow as accents or highlights in it, but you definitely want to have more tonal qualities than just straight yellow. So I'm gonna mix white, yellow. So you can see if you use that with this skin tone, it's gonna be really, really bright. So yellow and purple actually mixed together makes a really beautiful blonde color. So what we're gonna do is just mix a tiny, tiny dab of red and a a tiny bit of blue. So the same thing that we did for the skin tone, but we just want this one to have more yellow in it. A little bit more yellow. So you can see the blue and the red just really tone that down. So it's not just straight yellow. I'm using just the tiniest amount of red. Now, if you wanted this to be more of a strawberry blonde, like you could just add a tiny bit more red, but you still are gonna need the blue in there to tone it down. So that is a really great base for blonde hair. So then from there, I'm just going to add white to it and have a lighter shade for highlights. All right, so I'm gonna wash my brush and then I'll demonstrate more of a medium brunette color. So from here, we're gonna create a brown. So brown is made by mixing green and red. So when you break the primaries down, it's yellow, blue, and red. So yellow and blue make green, and red is obviously already there. So I'm gonna start with the red as my base. And now we need almost equal parts of blue and yellow to tone down the red. So right now it's quite dramatic, so that means we need more blue. So this is starting to be a really nice brunette color. Of course, you could use kind of like the brunette color and add blonde highlights into it. That would be really pretty. So you can see I'm just adding tiny, tiny little dabs of paint to alter the color. And like I said, when we were mixing the skin color, less is more, so just do really small amounts. It's probably too much red. It's leaning a little bit purple, so I want a little bit more yellow in that. Okay, that's looking really nice for a nice medium color. So from there, I'm just gonna move some to the side and then mix just a tiny bit of white into it. And that'll give us a nice highlight color for that brunette hair. All right, so I'm gonna wash my brush and create a darker shade. So we're gonna do the same thing. We want more of a deep violet, but then we're gonna add a little bit of yellow to make it lean just a little bit darker. So I'm starting with blue. We're gonna add red into it. A little bit more blue. And then I'm gonna add some yellow. And on this one, I wanna make it just a little bit darker. So I'm gonna add a touch of the black into it. Just a touch. Might have been a little too much. Okay, so from there, I'm gonna do the same thing, pull it to the side, and add a tiny bit of white to it. A little bit of yellow because it was looking a little bit purple. And there you go. So we have like a lighter shade, medium, and dark. So you can alter these shades to whatever color you're wanting to paint by just adding, you know, if you want more strawberry blonde or more auburn, add a touch more red to it. Really, there's a million shades within it, and you can choose the darker and the medium tone for the highlight. So you can really have fun with this and make it your own. So I'm gonna move on to the hair, onto my ballerina, and for mine, I'm gonna go with a blonde. Okay, so I am starting back in on my ballerina, and I'm gonna go with the blonde shade for her hair. So I'm using my number 6 paintbrush. Where is it here? Number 6. A lot of times I mix with a larger paintbrush and then switch to a smaller one when I'm actually painting. So I'm gonna do the same thing that I just did in our little mixing tutorial. I'm gonna start with white. If you've already mixed this, then you are gonna start with your darker color for your hair. So I'm adding some yellow and a touch of red and a touch of blue. And just a little bit of water. All right, so I'm gonna start going at the top of the hairline and just draw an outline at the top for her hair. And then where I'm cutting across my face, so I have just a half circle. Now I want it to kind of swoop across her face, so I'm gonna have it curve down and then back up towards her ear. So it's kind of a really gentle S curve there, or a backwards S curve. And then I'm gonna draw a half circle at the top for her bun. You need a little bit more paint. Too much red. Okay, so then I'm just gonna go ahead and fill in the hair. So from here, what I want to do is create a lighter shade of this. So I'm just mixing a little bit more yellow. Oh my goodness, that was way too much red. The majority of painting figures, I feel like, is mixing colors. I feel like I spend like 90% of my time mixing colors when I am painting ballerinas. So I'm gonna add some white into this and create just a highlight color. So I have a lighter shade. So with this one, I want to come on the right side of her face, and I'm just going to draw a line that kind of hugs her face and then flips out for a little hair that's kind of hanging there. And it's just a nice face frame. I'm kind of just cleaning up my edges right now. That color is a little bit darker. All right, so I have white mixed into it. I'm gonna go on top of the hair now and add just a small highlight. I wanna highlight near the face. So I'm adding just a lighter shade by the face. I need a little bit more white to make it stand out a little bit more. So right by that face, I'm adding just a highlight on top of that. And then I want to add a lighter line at the top of the head. It's just kind of where the light is hitting. If you remember, our light source is coming from the right side. So I'm going to go on the bun and just add a highlight. So I'm doing 2 little paint strokes on the right side of the bun. You can do a small line at the top too, just to show where the light is coming. Sometimes I'll kind of like blend it into the hair so it's not so harsh. And then I also like to come on the back side of the neck and have a few little pieces of hair kind of flipping out. So it got a little too light on that side. So I'm mixing just a little bit more of my darker blonde color. So yellow, tiny bit of blue, tiny bit of red. And I'm trying just to create that same gradient. Wow, that was too much red. I'm trying just to create that same gradient that we did on the skin. So we just want light to dark. And that'll help really give our figure form. There's our darker blonde color. So I'm just adding in this darker blonde. I need to add a little bit of water so it doesn't stand out quite so much, but I want this darker blonde color on the back. So for your hair that you're mixing at home, just keep in mind you want the lighter shades of your color to be on the right side of your figure where your light source is coming, and then you want your darker shades to be on the left side. So I'm just drawing that line and kind of blending it into the hair. And you can add a tiny bit of the darker color into this face frame to really give that form as well. So after I've done that, I wash my brush off. And then we're gonna go into our tutu. So for this, I need more white. I'm still using my number 6 paintbrush. So I'm gonna go in with white paint. And for the bodice, I'm gonna start with horizontal brush strokes. So I have a little bit of yellow still on my brush. Make sure you get it nice and clean. I always like to have a rag or a paper towel nearby and kind of test my brush and make sure that I get all of the paint off of it. All right, so I'm going in with the white and I'm doing horizontal brush strokes on this bodice. You can see how that darker color kind of gives it more depth, so it's not just flat white paint. You can have some of that showing through if you'd like to. So I'm doing horizontal brush strokes and then I kind of clean up the right and left side with a vertical stroke. So from there, I'm gonna come down to the tutu and I'm just gonna do diagonal lines. And I'm just gonna start building layers of diagonal lines that come starting from the center and pull out. I have a little bit of yellow still on my brush, but I like to see a variety of colors, so I think that is totally fine. I'll go back in and brighten it up with more white afterwards. I want some of this blue underneath to show through. I'm not trying to cover up every last bit of it. So I'm adding a little bit of water to keep my paint flowing. I'm like blowing through the white paint. I need more. So for this, I kind of am covering up some of the red outlines that we started with, or the pink outlines that we started with. I'm not gonna have a harsh line there. So I want my skirt to come over that line. If you have other colors on hand at home and you want to mix it up, you could feel free to change up the tutu and do whatever you please on the color. Okay, so that is good for right now. So next I'm gonna move into this base, and I started with this darker version of kind of like a blue, navy blue. Now I'm gonna lighten it up. So I'm keeping the white on my paintbrush. And I'm picking up just a touch of that ultramarine. And my black is dried. So just a touch of ultramarine and a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of black. You really don't need a lot. I just want to tone that color down a tiny bit. That will be good. So I'm gonna go in with water and I'm just gonna do a wash on top of this. Just kind of lighten it up a little bit. I want to keep this really light and airy. And with this color, I like to go into the tutu a little bit, mix up more of it. I think with the acrylic paints, you just need to keep working quickly with them because they dry so quickly. I'm adding just a touch more of titanium white to that color. And so I'm going to use this and go into my tutu a little bit and kind of clean up some of these brush strokes. I'm using this to kind of erase some of that red line that's showing we did at the beginning. And you can come into the foot and kind of carve a little arch into the foot. Adding a little bit of this blue to create a shadow between the bodice and the skirt. Then I like to take this color, lighten it. So I'm adding even more white into it, and then add just a little shadow into the hair and behind the back. So I'm doing this just on the left side, except for on this face framing here, I want to add a tiny bit. Might actually, let's switch to a smaller brush for that portion. So the number 1. A lot of times when I'm painting, I end up holding 2 paintbrushes. It's really just not realistic that you're not switching back and forth. Once you mix up colors, you like to use the same color so you don't have to mix it again. So I'm using just a tiny bit of this blue around this face frame, just on the inner left side of it. Do the same thing underneath these hairs that are kind of flying away in the back. And then I'm gonna add a little bit around the edge of the tutu here. And then you can do the same thing underneath the leg. And underneath the arm. I'm just adding a little bit of a shadow. So once you've done that, go ahead and rinse your brush off. And then I wanna make sure that my tutu has dried really well. And for this last bit of painting, you're gonna need more really clean white paint and just a touch of yellow or whatever color you wanna use for the bow on her outfit. So I'm gonna be using 2 brushes for this last part. I'm gonna use my number, where is it? Number 10. I still pulled up the number 6. My flat number 10 and my number 1 paintbrush. So I have my largest paintbrush and my smallest. So I'm gonna start with my small right now. I'm gonna go in with white paint and I wanna add in a strap that's gonna come over her shoulder. So I'm starting kind of in the center of this bodice and I'm just drawing a line that curves up around her shoulder. I think if you do this just really confidently, don't try to overthink it. Try not to shake with your hand when you're doing it, just do a confident 1 stroke and be done with it. And then I wanna take the white and I'm gonna go into the hair and add in just some really bright highlights. So 1 on the right side here. This face frame, you can add 1 or 2. Now, if you have darker hair, you may paint it on the ballerina, you may wanna use just one of your lightest shades, so you tone it down a little bit. I just wanna add in some white to really make it pop. Sometimes I even take it all the way around just for some highlights. And then on the bun, put that small brush away, and now I'm going in with my largest flat paintbrush, and I just want to add some bright, really chunky brush strokes to my tutu, so it's just really cleaning it up. And I want to keep some of these areas that have some of the blue showing so that there's variation to it, so that it's kind of looks like it's made out of tulle or some kind of airy fabric. So I'm not trying to make it totally solid. All right, so I'm going to switch back to my really skinny paintbrush, and for this part, I am going to use yellow. Or if you have a metallic gold on hand, you could use that, or you could use pink or another color. All right, so I'm gonna start with 1 dot in the center. And for this, I'm kind of going on the left. Actually, first we're gonna draw a line. So I'm drawing a line around where the bodice meets the skirt. It's kind of curved. Then I'm gonna go on the left. Then I'm gonna go on the left side and I'm gonna draw a dot. Okay, so I've drawn just a dot kind of on the left side. So this is on her back. From there, I'm just gonna make pretty much a figure 8. So I'm gonna start on the right side and just kind of curve up and then come down. And then I'm going to go on the left side and go up and down. So I literally just drew a figure 8. It's just sideways. Then from there,
I want to just have 2 kind of curved lines that come down into her tutu for the rest of the ribbon. If you are using blonde, you could go in, or you could do this with brown or whatever hair color you have. I just want to add a tiny bit of bright yellow into the hair for some more accents. I'll sometimes do this even with pink or blue or turquoise if I really want to feel funky and just add in some bright pieces in the hair. I think it's really fun. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do for this painting is sign it. For this piece, I'm going to go in with blue, mix with some of my black, and make just kind of a dark navy color. But you can sign it in whatever color you please. And I think this bottom right corner works well. Thank you so much for joining me for today's class. I hope that you loved it. I hope that you learned some new tricks for painting figures, and we cannot wait to see all of your paintings. So be sure to tag us with the hashtag #CBrookePaint, and you can tag me at Brooke Ring. We are so thankful and hope that you'll join us again for a future class.